Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's edition of The Wellness Policy. My name is Wai Ting. We're back. We're back for the second edition of the show in 2024. And I guess for people who aren't typically aware, you never know when somebody might be listening to The Wellness Policy or watching The Wellness Policy for the first time. We are a podcast that kind of started off, with maybe a discussion of topics related to whatever you might define as wellness, and that could be mental health, could be just things we like, things we think about that might not be so pleasant to think about sometimes, just an open and honest discussion. And typically, this is the show where we don't really talk about professional wrestling. We are speaking to a pro wrestling audience. This is a show for a pro wrestling audience, but we typically stray away from, discussing pro wrestling itself. But that's not the case for this particular episode, because we are going to specifically talk about pro wrestling, specifically why we happen to like it. And joined with me, as always, are my co-hosts Neal Flanagan and Jordan Goodman. Welcome, guys.
Hey, Wai. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you
Your
doing?
Wellness. My wellness is up and down at the moment. I'll be really brief about this, but work is extremely busy at the moment. And without getting into any boring details, especially for a North American audience, Northern Ireland has a new government, and it came into being very suddenly and kind of unexpectedly, because it's a coalition that has to agree to govern together, and they hadn't been for a while. So anyway, they got up and running all of a sudden. Their first assembly sitting was on a Saturday, and the staff, we've been running around like idiots, basically trying to get their wheels moving, So it's been a period of unsettlement and just being a little busier than normal, but it will settle down in the next few weeks. And then I've got a very nice trip lined up in early April, to reward myself for all this hard work. So,
yeah. You're speaking of Philadelphia, of course, which all three of us will be present at. But I'm sorry to hear that, Neal, especially considering you just went through a birthday weekend. So happy belated birthday.
Yeah.
I'm old.
Oh, aren't
End
we
of
all?
story.
Aren't we all? Jordan, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm in Florida. Apologize perhaps for this cavernous room that I sit in as I broadcast live, not only on YouTube, but Wai just let me know Facebook and Twitter as well.
X, Jordan, presently.
Yeah. I see. That's a shame.
Does that change things for you, knowing that we're being broadcast to an even wider audience than usual?
Yeah, I guess on Twitter, I need to. I don't want to. I feel like I need to censor myself. That's a place to demonstrate respect and restraint.
Yes, of course. Hey, we're here to talk about pro wrestling. Jordan, as with many of the topics recently, I feel like these are your suggestions. You really are the driving force, I would say, behind the wellness policy, and you come up with great topics as always. Why did you come up with this one?
Well, thank you. I feel the responsibility, given that I make the most money off of this show between the three of us. Why not talk about wrestling? This is what ostensibly connects the three of us and anyone paying attention to this show. It's post-wrestling. So, but I think it's an interesting discussion about why the fuck do we spend so much time and energy and attention on this thing? For me, I'll speak for myself. It's been an interest and love of my life since I was maybe 5 years old. So this is a long time, 30 plus years. And as I've aged, I've engaged with it in different ways. And I think it's, at least for me, interesting and, dare I say, fun to explore why I do what I do.
Okay. Yes. As always, you're right. Like many of the topics that I think we've discussed here, we we just accept that we like things, but exactly why do we like something? Why do we keep coming back to it? What does it provide for us in our daily lives?
Especially something, sorry, Wei, especially something like wrestling where it's so disliked and so misunderstood by perhaps most people. It's not like we're talking about food or music more broadly. We're talking about pro wrestling. It's a weird thing that we're talking about.
Super weird. So why do you like wrestling, Jordan?
I don't know. To be honest, I didn't put, obviously this is a topic that I've discussed throughout life. It's something that I think about every now and then. But when we decided last month to make this the show, I intentionally did not put much thought leading up to it. I wanted this to be more of a let me crawl in the dark and see what comes up as we engage in the exercise. I can share just my origin story of being attracted to wrestling. Like I said, I was about 5 years old. I was watching, this is perhaps one of my most earliest vivid memories, watching TV with my dad and my brother. And my dad was flipping through the channels. Wrestling came on. And as I recall, I was just like, wait, what is this? And my dad explained what it was. He was never into wrestling. He was familiar with it. And growing up in Baltimore, in hindsight, I realized how blessed I was. Just the Northeast in the States was a very vibrant town, an area of the world for pro wrestling. So my dad was very familiar with the Bruno Sammartino, etc. And he was like, this was wrestling, and he kept it on. And then maybe within a week, he came home with my brother and brought home a Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage figure. So like he certainly encouraged the natural interest that we had in it. And I kind of have been hooked ever since. At that time, it probably was just super interesting for me to see like real people, but playing cartoon characters or superheroes on screen. And then this kind of dynamic of a live audience that it's theater in the round, and the audience helps influence or sometimes even dictate what happens in the drama. And there's production, and there's pyro, and there's music, and there's storylines, and there's characters and promos. And as a 5-year-old boy, like, what's not to like?
It's very similar to perhaps how I got into it myself. I mean, pro wrestling for me and like maybe a lot of people my age typically came on during, the Saturday morning cartoon block, or for me, in my case, right after it. So, on Fox, on the local affiliate that we would pick up here in Toronto from Buffalo, we'd get Fox cartoons, all the way up until the noon hour. And then at 12 o'clock, we get WWF Superstars. So for me, I always just kind of considered it the same block. I watch my Saturday morning cartoons. And this is a cartoon, but live action, but with just as colorful characters. And certainly at the time, just as colorful storylines that were completely captivating for, at the time, I want to say maybe I think I got into it maybe like 91, 92. So I would have been like 7.
Yeah,
maybe
same.
Yeah. So at that time, like it was a thing that completely just kind of, I was completely engrossed in. These are like larger than life, colorful personalities portraying what felt like adaptations of, the types of storytelling that I was getting via cartoons anyway.
Like, imagine if at that age, from your perspective of a child, you were like, wait a second, Ninja Turtles, like, those are real guys that maybe you could go see in person and know from, being, again, a 5 or 7-year-old. I saw Ninja Turtles live, wonderful tour, but I knew even at that age, these are people in costumes. I didn't quite know that with pro wrestlers. I was like, this feels more real than Ninja Turtles, but it also kind of felt like Ninja Turtles. And that was really interesting. And I don't know if there was anything else I could compare it to.
What about you, Neil? What were your first memories of getting into pro wrestling?
Slightly different because I'm in Europe, I guess, and I'm a little older than you guys. So what you're describing to me is very much what I see through the eyes of my younger brother. I'm a little older, so pro wrestling for me in its earliest sort of memory was Saturday afternoon on ITV on UK television. And it's British wrestling. It's, you know, it's a little like boxing in that it's got defined 5-minute rounds. The rules are different from what we all agree internationally what wrestling is these days. They had a thing called a public warning. And if you had 3 of those, you were disqualified. And it was these characters like Big Daddy, just this enormous kind of, not to be disrespectful, he's dead now, but enormous fat guy who's a terrible worker. If you ever find some of his old matches on YouTube, he just would boing people out of the way with his tummy. And his finishing move was the laziest splash. He would just kind of like flop on top of people. Giant Haystacks was another one that these names may or may not mean anything to a North American audience. I know Big Daddy means something to Dave Meltzer because he's tortured all the time by Europeans who want him to go into the Hall of Fame. And Dave is like, nah, this guy. He obviously had an influence at that time. But so then there was a bit of a gap. It was falling out of favor. It wasn't too hot with kids. The standard audience were kind of grannies who stereotypically would hit the heels with their handbags when they came down the aisle. And so you sort of have to fast forward a few years to when you're talking about the early 90s, and that's when WWF began being shown on, over here, Sky Television. And it was the syndicated show. It was Superstars of Wrestling and Wrestling Challenge, which were virtually identical, you know, sort of showcase matches from these enormous tapings that they used to do with the cartoonish promos to camera with the wrestler's logo sort of, you know, behind them, you know. And I used to, even though I was in my teens at this point, I loved it. It was just so crazy. It was just so silly. Everybody at school loved it. My younger brother loved it. So he was still primary school at that time, and I was getting into my teens. So it had a very broad appeal, I think. It was very much family viewing, I think, at that time. I remember my parents, you know, would sit and watch it with my younger brother and me. So that's how I got into what we know as pro wrestling.
Wait, do you remember maybe the first pay-per-view or like big build that hooked you? And like for me, I'm almost positive it was Survivor Series 91. This is where Undertaker won the title from Hulk Hogan, only to, I think, lose it a couple of days later on a Tuesday in Texas, they say. That was the first pay-per-view I watched live. And I was one of the few kids that was like family, friends, adults, they were watching it. And like even that, as a maybe 6-year-old at the time, it felt like a big event. And also what I think solidified it for me is that I was watching this in community with others, and people were getting into it and like really excited about it. And again, like there was just something that felt magnetic and interesting and fun about that.
Mm-hmm. I probably got into it maybe a year after you did. You know, for me, I remember very clearly the build to Survivor Series 1992. And this was the Ultimate Maniacs, consisting of Macho Man Randy Savage and the Ultimate Warrior, set to take on Ric Flair and I suppose at the time, like maybe close to recently debuted Razor Ramon. And I remember it well because I remember the moment where, you know, Macho Man Randy Savage gave Ultimate Warrior the sunglasses, and they made such a big deal about like building this new team of like, you know, this new mega powers of the Ultimate Warrior and Macho Man. And then all of a sudden it just went away. And they didn't really care to make too much of an explanation of it. Of course, this is where the Ultimate Warrior departed from the company again, and replacing him was Mr. Perfect at the time. So I think I was just maybe a little bit both confused and also kind of enamored by just how weird it was, and it was maybe my first glimpse into another terribly interesting aspect of this whole thing that you wouldn't get from cartoons, you wouldn't get from really many other media, in that it's fiction that is produced in real time, and it can change based on real life circumstances. So I had no idea what was going on at the time, but nonetheless, like it, especially when I got, to being closer to an adolescent, and of course with the internet, and you actually got a real sort of like fuller sense of what goes on behind the scenes. I would say like that was probably what continued my curiosity as a pro wrestling fan.
I think. Oh fuck! I'm sorry. Go ahead, Neil.
You're on X, Jordan. You can't say words like that. Yeah, 91, just a slight aside, very big year for my fandom in wrestling, for US wrestling, because that was my first live show. So you guys are maybe 5 at this point. I'm not so sure. I'm in my teens, and myself and my younger brother go to the first World Wrestling Federation show in Ireland. They came to Belfast on April 26th, 1991, and they ran Dublin the night after that. And I was there, and the card was, I'll just run down it because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but Jimmy Snuka defeated Brooklyn Brawler. Jim Neidhart defeated Haku. The Barbarian defeated Greg the Hammer Valentine. Jake Roberts defeated the Berserker. The Texas Tornado defeated the Warlord. And this was news to me when I read this, that I had seen Kerry Von Erich live. British Bulldog defeated Earthquake. I do have a better memory of that because he got an enormous pop. Roddy Piper defeated Ted DiBiase. And then Andre the Giant, teaming up with the Rockers, defeated Mr. Fuji and the Orient Express, at that time made of Kato and Tanaka. And I remember that match very well because it was Andre the Giant. And even though he was only a couple of years from his definitely hanging up his boots, if not dying at this point, he was severely limited in what he did. He didn't take any bumps. His maneuver was really just to squash all 3 of the other, trio into the turnbuckles. But the crowd ate it up, including me and my brother. We absolutely loved it. It was fantastic. And it was clearly a point in time where WWF really saw a giant market in the UK, because they came to Ireland, they did a UK tour, they did the same in 92, they did the same in 93. I'm sure they've pretty much been there every year since. And it was a phenomenon, as I say, through people from the age of 5, 6, all the way up into their late teens. And I knew, I'll just add this, I knew it wasn't on the up, because I was a little older, and also I don't know whether you really need to be that logical to understand that in those days, the style of wrestling, stomping your foot while you punch someone doesn't make a punch any harder. You can't, anyone who's wrestled with their brother in the front, in the living room knows you can't escape a Boston, you can't escape someone sitting on your back by crawling with your hands when they're putting their full weight on you. These things.
Is that scientifically proven? Do we know that?
I guess if you're.
How would any of us know that? How many of us, I suppose, would even have been put into a Boston Crab to escape out of? I mean, a lot of us, perhaps, yes, but I don't know if it's universal, knowledge.
Jordan, you and your brother are close in age. You're only about 18 months apart. You guys probably wrestled in the living room.
Of course.
Did you ever put each other in holes that you couldn't escape from, or crawl to the fictional ropes?
Yeah, the ropes would be the wall. Sorry about the call. I think that was the Northern Irish government checking in on Neil's problematic internet behavior, they said. So, especially being, as I said, a 5-year-old boy, I naturally wrestled, and I had a great partner and a brother that was about the same age. Like, we would grapple. And so when we see that being normalized, but with these dramatic characters and stories on screen, that's very exciting, because we could then emulate that. And I was also very much into music. As a young child, it was much more difficult to emulate the musicianship I listened to. But Justin and I, yeah, we could grapple and we could throw each other into the walls and then magically bounce back because they're now ropes, and the couch becomes turnbuckles that we can climb on top of, and pillows become steel chairs. And so a lot of the fandom of wrestling was playfulness, was recreating what we saw.
Thank goodness you had the sense to use pillows instead of the actual steel chairs.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a question I think about often, and it's at what age should I allow my child to experience pro wrestling? Because all the things we're talking about, like, they're very warm and fuzzy memories, but there is a concern as a parent of letting your child see maybe even fictitious violence. I mean, would they know that it's fictitious? And if they do decide to reenact it, would they have the sense to not use a real chair, or at least not throw a real punch, or to not apply a real submission hold, or deliver a whatever, if they're watching a Darby Allin match?
I wish I had that knowledge. So I'll fast forward a bit, but when I was 13 or just turned 14, when I was 14 years old, I actually trained and performed as a professional wrestler for about 2 years. Like, this was 1999 in the summer, the height of mainstream popularity for pro wrestling. And in my local community, a school opened up. Maybe the most notable wrestler that I trained with, some might be familiar with Ruckus. He was inducted into the Indie Hall of Fame last year. Only injury I ever really sustained that I'm aware of was a black eye from him, and I love him for it. It made me feel like tough and cool as a child. But we had, it was like, so in Maryland State Athletic Commission is relatively strict compared to other states in this country. And so you technically had to be 18 to perform in a more public forum. And because of that, the more public shows, for some reason, they had me be a ring announcer, even though I was like barely 5 foot tall and wore the oversized dress shirt down to my knees doing so. But each month we would do a like friends and family performance in the warehouse. And I think month 4 was like the weapons month, where we learned how to like use chairs and even like flash paper, like fireball type stuff.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it really was amazing way. Like the fact that I was, that was an opportunity within a 10-minute drive of my childhood home, and that my parents allowed me to do it is kind of mind-boggling. Anyway, one of the matches we had was like a battle royal for all the people in the youth program, but like a weapons battle royal. And so we were taught, protect yourself, put your hands up with the steel chair. But as I'm performing in front of the 35 people, I want to be taken seriously. So I did not protect myself, and I took a chair shot straight to my head as a 14 or 15-year-old. And there's only 2 times in life, the other was playing middle school football, where I feel like I had concussion symptoms, and that was certainly one of them. Like kind of the hearing the ringing of a bell, like it was fucked up. I was fine after, but it took me a good few minutes to like feel fine. And I wish, but again, so you're talking about being a parent and making decisions about whether children should watch this stuff or not. In 1999, that was the norm. Like, you don't protect your head. And like, these wrestlers were getting whacked sometimes multiple times a night at full throttle with a real steel chair. It's fucked up. I learned my lesson. Thankfully, after experiencing that once, I realized, okay, this wrestling shit isn't cool enough to continue doing that. But I wish I didn't need to learn from experience.
There seemed to be, I mean, not just maybe, you wanted to emulate the pro wrestlers that you see on TV, but like, was there a sense of, I don't know, I'm tough. I need to prove my worth, to these grownups, that I'm not going to put my hands up for this chair shot?
Of course. Cause like, so Ruckus, he was a bit older than me. He kind of did a slingshot over the top rope leg drop when we were just practicing one day, and his ass just landed on my face and I got a black eye. he was very apologetic. He's a super, super sweet guy. But there was this sense of like, yeah, these older guys, and I'm 5'6". I've always been a smaller guy. And there was this sense that, I took it like a quote man, and these guys respect me for it. So there was a sense in like proving one's toughness in this type of culture, especially in 1999 or 2000. So like I took that as a point of pride, and I pushed myself as there he is. Lovely guy.
Former Jordan Goodman rival.
Yes.
Luck is here. Pictured
Yes,
on screen.
Got the best of me. Like,
were you Calvin at that point, Jordan?
Yes. I don't know if I shared this publicly. My name was Calvin. Took it from Calvin and Hobbes. I was the natural born slacker. I was bringing the skateboard down to the ring and using it as a weapon decades before Darby Allin made it famous. That was the gimmick.
It's so much about you that I feel like the audience hasn't known. You're a very interesting person overall.
Thank you. I really get into the things that I love. As I've stated many times here and elsewhere, the two things I've been most naturally attracted to since I was a young child, music and pro wrestling. And I had really good parenting that allowed me enough permission and opportunity to really explore music and pro wrestling in all kinds of ways, artistically, socially, professionally, and otherwise.
So I guess we've kind of talked a bit about maybe how we got into pro wrestling. Now, Jordan, you seem to take it to a bigger level towards your adolescence. Have either of you ever had the dark ages? And if so, how did you come back to it later on in life?
So I kind of stopped watching around the time I stopped doing it, around like 2000 or so. Or maybe 2001. At this point, I was high school now, like 10th grade. I was kind of realizing girls might be more attracted to me being a successful musician, and not like the pro wrestling thing wasn't getting the girls when I'd be telling them as in high school, like, yeah, this is what I do a couple nights a week and sometimes on the weekends, performing children's birthday parties as a professional wrestler. It also hurt a lot less to play music. And I started going to concerts a lot. So that became a lot more interesting. And I guess it was kind of like when the Invasion thing happened, and I was very much into ECW, and that kind of went away. And then WCW, like that wasn't interesting for a few years at that point and then ceased to exist. That's when I lost interest. So like the whole Brock Lesnar run, I missed that. And I still paid attention and would watch WrestleMania, but it was weird because by the time I started college in 2003, it was like, I guess wrestling isn't a fixture of my life so much anymore. And that surprised me. What got me back into it was 2005. SummerSlam was in DC. This was Hulk Hogan versus Shawn Michaels. And my younger cousins needed a ride. They asked if I wanted to go. I said, not really. And they said, well, we'll buy you a ticket if you drive us. And I said, okay. So I started watching again just to be caught up on storylines. And that kind of hooked me again. And I really haven't left it since. So yeah, maybe about 4 years, kind of end of high school into college. That was the only time I dipped out for a bit. What about you, Neil?
Yeah, for me, there was a bit of a dry spell. I mean, Raw was always on the DVR. So I kept my sort of some level of interest in there. But for me, roughly the same time, mid-2000s, as in mid-aughts, I was working at that point. There were far fewer people to talk about it with. I felt just less interest in it generally. It seemed kind of uncool. I was much more into Premier League football. Yeah. And I don't know what drew me back, but it was around, I can tell you it was around 2011. So there's a fairly long gap. And I do remember that sort of spell because it was the summer of punk. and what followed on from that. It was also when I started listening to the Law, getting back into the pay-per-views. And it wasn't too long after that that the network launched. And that was for me kind of a big deal. It just rekindled all of my childhood kind of love for the whole thing, because I was able to go back and revisit all of these pay-per-views that I had not seen or not seen in years and wanted to revisit. And of course, for the low price of $9.99 a month, and it still exists in Europe. It'll disappear when the Netflix deal kicks in January. But the network I thought was great. I thought it was great value. I was really into the library. And so WrestleMania 30, I was super back into it, for Yeselmania. 31 at Levi's Stadium, I remember that being one of my favorites still, because I thought that was the sort of field, and that's nearly 10 years ago now. It feels recent, but it's not that recent. The network launched in 2014. This is 2024. It was sort of the field push of Reigns, that Royal Rumble, where even The Rock couldn't really get him over. And I thought it was just a masterstroke to inject Seth Rollins into that, to make it the three-way in the heist of the century thing, line from Cole. I just remember really enjoying 30 and 31, and I think that was me back at that point, fully back, fully watching all the programming, for better or worse, because there have been some serious ups and downs in those 10 or so years.
For me, I was really into pro wrestling, I guess, from those early days in like 92 all the way, I would say, until maybe 96 or maybe 97-ish. I was very much a Brett guy. I kind of came up with Brett's ascent to the main event scene. And I guess being Canadian, there's that natural attachment. This was even before I think I recognized like the value of work rate, for instance. Like I just liked this character of Bret the Hitman Hart. So when he went away for that good chunk after WrestleMania 12, I think I started to be disengaged myself. And even when he came back, I didn't really come back. And I just kind of probably, got into other things that took my sort of interest away from pro wrestling. So it wasn't until like wrestling hit its boom sort of in the mainstream, where all my friends were suddenly talking about this thing that I used to be the only person among my group that would watch. And then all of a sudden I'm like in high school now, and everybody's talking about, did you see what happened on Raw? Did you see this thing?
Wasn't that weird?
So weird. Yeah.
Like, because everyone knew me as the wrestling guy. Like, and then all of a sudden, all the other boys wanted to come over and watch the pay-per-views. And I'm like, yeah, motherfuckers, this is what I've been telling you about for years.
But it was a very different product, from the mid 90s compared to maybe, the sort of new generation phase. And I just kind of got caught up maybe in some of that hysteria. And I've told the story many times, but it was one day watching Nitro after school, and my friends were like, hey, like, let's put on Nitro. We'd like get on the phone with each other, and we'd just kind of like hang out and talk, and we'd watch. And it was the Finger Poke of Doom edition of WCW Nitro, where like, I don't even know if I understood what was going on, but obviously I knew Hulk Hogan, I knew Kevin Nash from my days watching WWF. And then this really weird thing happened where he tapped Nash in the chest, and he laid down. And it was a big ruse, and both the Wolfpack and the NWO Black and White got back together. Like I had knowledge of these things just through osmosis of like people wearing a black and white NWO t-shirt and a Wolfpack t-shirt. And so for me, I'm like, wow, this is a big, really cool thing that just happened. What, wow, this was like really monumental, without any obviously like attachment to what it meant for business, or just even maybe what it meant for, I think, disappointment for a fan base at the time. I just thought this one particular moment was like wild and neat, like to just kind of step into.
Wait,
so yeah,
you have a really keen sense of the absurd in your humor. Tom Green and sort of who's the guy from The Curse? His name's Nathan Fielder. Yeah. Did you find that funny at all at that age, or was it just this is cool, or because I think it's highly amusing now, looking back on those
Well,
moments.
what was funny about it?
It's just so stupid. I guess.
But like, is it any stupider than like the cartoon you'd watch and like, I don't know, this big reveal at the end of like the season finale that you didn't see coming?
That's a
Like,
fair question.
like I think it's stupid now, knowing I think what it meant for business, knowing maybe even the disappointment of like them building to the storyline and whatever all the shit. But like that was stuff I wasn't even privy to at the time. I just thought, oh, okay, here's a big sort of like climactic moment in this like long storyline between these two entities. So maybe it wasn't so much stupid as it was just like neat, like this thing happened. And then I think from that point on, what really got me back into wrestling was the internet, and it was the sense of community and this sort of like, I don't know, peeking back behind the curtain of this thing I liked for a long time but didn't know much about. For me, a lot of it was the law as well. I saw it was probably after one of these editions of Nitro where Off the Record came on, like almost like right afterwards, and Jeff Merrick was on the show with Bill Goldberg, and Merrick was obviously like a great panelist and promoted this thing called Law afterwards. I was a big listener of terrestrial radio at the time, so I made an effort to listen to the show, and that really just kind of opened my eyes to this like whole other level of this thing I used to like that I had no knowledge about. And I would say certainly as an adult and even as an adolescent at that time, it was the thing that drew me more into pro wrestling, the thing that made me a bigger fan. And I'm sure a lot of you guys can also relate to that.
Yeah, it's a tremendous point, and one I missed out really in saying when I really got fully back was because there was more community, and no more so, I have to say, than in the past, few years since Post took off, because I wasn't really part of the pro boards community that the law fostered. I know there are some old hands who are. Jesse from the Six is out there. Hacksaw Jim Powers is out there. Brad. I don't want to, I'll start running out of names and then people get offended. But when Post took off and they had the forum and then the Discord, I began to make genuine long distance friendships with people. And we could just talk about all this stuff in a way that I'm not sitting with a coworker talking about what happened on Raw or even WrestleMania. Most of them don't know what's happening in April. So that sense of community is enormous.
You're clearly very attached to pro wrestling right now, Neil. Like you are a writer on our site. So you have to kind of keep a very close eye to it. But like, would you like how much of your conversation is pro wrestling with maybe this audience even?
It's a good question. It depends. Often when there's surely, of course, whenever there's an event or something very notable happens, or in the news around wrestling, which I'm sure we'll get to because that's not been wonderful lately. But yeah, once those friendships, that's the sort of in. When you find that you're connecting with somebody on other levels, like Jordan and I, like you and I, then we can talk about other stuff as well, music and just life and who, what's going on with you and things like that. So I find it not only a great, the community, not only a great place to discuss wrestling, but a great place to sort of find people that you genuinely like and become friends with.
It's almost like, by the time you meet somebody that has kind of gone through these similar funnels of fandom through maybe getting into professional wrestling, then finding it on the internet, and then finding this very niche professional wrestling website, and then deciding to go to the community tab to get onto a Discord. By the time you've all passed those filters, there's a very good chance you have a lot of similarities in common, right?
That's one of the reasons why I loved going to concerts as a kid, because not just a kid, just a young adult too. I've never been into alcohol, like just let's go to the bar because it's Friday night. I'd go to concerts, and because I guess if I'm at a cafe or a bar, it feels a bit more awkward for me to just chat anyone up. And part of it is, I don't know how well it's going to go. It's just, but if I'm at a concert, then at a minimum, we have that common interest. And it felt easier to socialize, to meet new people, to engage in community. I really like being parts of community. I like being socially connected. I'm also very blessed that my brother has fucked with wrestling throughout his life. He's not super into it now, but he'll get down with the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania type stuff. He's always willing to chat about it. But I have 4 guys in my life that are kind of like cousins of mine, a bit younger than me. And most of them are very much into wrestling as well. So it's often, or it's,
Can I put, by the way, are these the same cousins that you met the Ultimate Warrior with?
no, that's Matthew Grossman, cousin of our guest Nick next month on the Wellness Policy, whom we'll talk about
Do I
later.
have permission to put this a photo of you up?
Absolutely. So let me share this story. So one of my uncles, Uncle Steve, he ran marketing at a few different race tracks when I was younger. So this Ultimate Warrior pick, this was Delaware racetrack. So that is me as maybe a 5-year-old with Justin next to me. You got one Jim Hellwig, minutes after he apparently was ingesting some substances, and then Matthew Grossman. He's got this hot pink poison, maybe trucker cap on, and rainbow suspenders with jorts and no shirt. What a
rainbow!
What a style!
An amazing photo. Yes, and the rainbow.
Yeah,
especially
ironic.
Yes.
So my uncle, he ran marketing initially at Delaware Racetrack, and I think he was one of the first, my uncle, or maybe the first, to like bring wrestlers to these racetracks to do meet and greets as a way to draw new business and get people, through the turnstiles for the first time, perhaps at these racetracks. And my uncle would tell me stories that like prior to this, he would be brought up to like WWF at Madison Square Garden, be put in a luxury box, and like they were courting him for this type of business. So I remember this day. What I do remember is Warrior, he put me on his shoulders and was just parading me around the office. It was amazing. Maybe a few years later, I was like 12. My uncle was running marketing at Philadelphia Racetrack. And something similar, he hired Sable and Mark Marrow. And for some reason, me, Justin, and Matt Grossman spent like a half a day with Sable and Mark Marrow. We greeted them when they arrived in their limo. And we hung out in my uncle's office. I remember we were making some like faux WrestleMania card where, of course, Mark Marrow challenged Steve Austin in the main event of WrestleMania for the world title. And like Sable is just looking at us, asking what it is. And like they were super, super cool. And for some reason, when they did their 2-hour meet and greet, the 3 of us sat with them at the table. I don't know if I've shared this story on the show before. So if you imagine this, like it makes no sense that you would go to a meet and greet and there'd be 3 preteens sitting with the talent, like 5 people at the table. And yet Sable and Mark Marrow were totally cool. They chatted us up the entire time. Like they acted like, they were friends. And I guess in hindsight, maybe my uncle had the leverage because he was paying them, but for whatever it was, they were super, super sweet to us. And then the next day was the only time I went to a WWF show where we got to go backstage, and we got to like Undertaker, Headbangers, Takamichi Noku, I remember, was shirtless and shivering. And we're just seeing these guys backstage, and then some handler takes us into a private room, and Mick Foley and Ken Shamrock just hang with us for a good 20 minutes and make us feel very special. So all that to say that through my uncle's experience, he showed me that you can engage with a wrestling company and engage with wrestlers conducting business, like that these things were possible and permissible in life. And then a couple years later, I actually train and perform as a pro wrestler, which then gives me more vision and possibility to be like, oh, I can start my own bands and go play shows like the heroes that I go see do this in person. And all that to say, when an opportunity arose for me to do something with Ring of Honor, it was like that that felt really normal and natural, and like not this pie in the sky, like unbelievable scenario for me. And so I really credit my uncle for stuff like that, because he normalized that at a very, very young age. It makes total sense to be a part of wrestling.
Interesting. I'll say for me, like, I never really had those ambitions to even, like, I don't know, be a part of the whole thing, or nor even maybe have a full-time career involved in the professional wrestling, which I kind of oddly do right now. Um, I never wanted to be a pro wrestler. Um, I I just didn't really kind of have that within me. Like, I was maybe more than content to kind of observe from the sidelines. I mean, my curiosity, I've kind of said in the past, was more about the production of it, was more about the creation of it. Was more about, I think, just the even coverage of it. I want to say, just strictly as a fan, and an observer. And I guess I've been backstage plenty of times at professional wrestling shows, simply covering it and working, at the Fight Network and doing things like that. But I've never kind of had that itch. What about you, Neil? Like, I mean, Jordan kind of talks about all this. I think from there's a lot of professional wrestling being produced, perhaps in spaces where he's close to, but was it similar for you? Did you have any thoughts about that?
For us in the early years, like they would come once a year. That is, WWF would come once a year, and it never felt accessible. But there was no wrestling school near me. There was no way in. We did cheer on Fit Finlay, who made the jump from the ITV wrestling that I was talking about before, all the way to World Wrestling Federation. So he was a bit of a hometown hero, and they would push him when they went on the European tour and came to Belfast. But to me, it was always as a consumer. It was always to be entertained by it, and it's the same. I guess I didn't feel that I had any aptitude for it or really wanted to learn it, and it's the same with something like music or acting, where I really appreciate consuming it, but I've never felt the impetus to be part of a band or to join the Amateur Dramatics Association that's near me or anything like that. So that's just the way I'm wired, I guess.
Neil, what do you think drew you to not just being a consumer of post wrestling, but a caller?
John and Wai.
Yeah.
In two words, it's because they're so accessible, they're so likable. They talked about wrestling in a way that I really appreciated. Your ego inflating ways right now, but I mean, it's true. I mean, compared to an awful,
keep going.
An awful lot of the other "we're shooting here, guys" podcasts. I just had no interest in any of that nonsense, and just some sort of grown-up talk about wrestling and the stories again behind what's going on in the ring, the creative, and even some of the company stuff, which initially I wasn't particularly interested in, but now I would never miss an episode of Pollock and Thurston, because I've become fascinated by all of that. So that's what drew me in, and I felt a need to want to get to know these guys, to speak to them in the first instance, to tell them how much I appreciated what they did. And then it sort of snowballed from there, almost accidentally. I offered to volunteer to do some things for John on the site. That became a little bit of writing, which became a bit more writing. The wellness policy as a spin-off, was Flow I'm going to get this wrong, was Flow episode 1? Or was Atomic Habits episode 1? That was
episode 2.
Okay. Yeah. Right from then, I was really into this show, and here I am. So it was, and in that case, it was the both of you, and of course the content that you create, which is inextricably tied to who you are. So, yeah, that's what drew me in to post wrestling to the point that I'm at right now.
When you'd go to local shows, Neil, would there be like a greater response for an Irish whip?
Excellent question, and no is the answer.
This is
Sorry
our
to
move.
disappoint. I know. No,
Is the Irish Whip the sharpshooter of Ireland?
I'm afraid not. Not in my experience, anyway.
It's a great move, by the way.
Oh,
it's
absolutely. Yeah.
Underrated, I'd
One of
say.
the most realistic moves, I think.
the
as well.
foundation of so much. So, for me, like just kind of going back to maybe my deepening of my fandom, I guess you could say, and attachment to pro wrestling. I mean, obviously it had to do with learning about a lot of the behind the scenes, and then now being fortunate enough at the time to be somewhat attached to it from a professional sense, getting an internship at the Fight Network, and then that led to my attachment to the law, of course. But even then, I would say I was less of a pro wrestling fan at the time, just because I think WWF was kind of not that great in that period, and I was not keeping up as closely with the product as I was something like MMA, for instance. It wasn't until I started doing the shows regularly and being able to even appreciate a bad show from a more analytical sense that I really kind of got into I think I've renewed my fandom of it. And to this day, there are people that ask, like, how could you watch, so much wrestling? How could, like, now the show's good. We get it a lot less, but like there were times where like 3-hour Raws were not very good whatsoever. And people would say, how could you watch it? When you're watching something with like a bit more of an analytical sense, and certainly having DVRs being able to skip through commercials and entrances is a big help in that too. But when you're able to watch something with that sort of focus, anything can be interesting. Anything can be, engrossing and captivating. So that's kind of what keeps me attached to it at this moment, good or bad, depending on what I'm watching.
One of my favorite post moments was the debut of Max Dupree, and you two guys, and it was clearly bad. That was bad. This guy, you can see the reception he gets these days, but being debuted as the head of Maximum Male Models was so absurd and bad that when you guys were recapping it, John lost it, and in a way that he doesn't often. He had to hand over to you, Wai, because he started crying with laughter, when he was talking about LA Knight giving this. There
Can you believe this?
He's looking for wrestlers that can main event WrestleMania and Milan Fashion Week or whatever. And John just lost it and started giggling, which doesn't happen to him often. And I found that's like when you two are reviewing bad segments and bad matches, when you're taking the piss out of it, that's pretty much as entertaining as anything else you do.
So this is also something that's, I think, pretty unique to pro wrestling, where like especially the WWE's version of and WCW as well, and really any pro wrestling promotion, when it's bad, there's value to be taken from it as well. I mean, look at the amount of, like, I don't know, material that has been written about the finger poke of doom, or like Wrestle Crap as a website in its entirety. When it's bad, it's still good, like, and that's where the sense of community comes in, where we can all bond together about just how bad it was and have this almost like cathartic sort of, like, I don't know, session talking about exactly why we dislike something. And it's not something I have too often with my other fandoms, but it exists, of course. You talk about Star Wars or you talk about Marvel, but I feel like there's a different level in pro wrestling, and because pro wrestling is it's live fiction, audiences speaking out, especially now, have an ability to change and dictate storylines in real time, as we saw recently with Cody and The Rock.
Yeah, I think there's a few points from that. So through the lens of art criticism, yeah, if it's not good, there is some value in being able to, like, express that or to bond over that. But I think part of it is that when it comes to pro wrestling as a genre, especially at like a highly produced TV level, there really isn't much other choice. So why would you spend time listening to a band that you don't like when there's infinite other bands that you can enjoy? With pro wrestling, you kind of just have WWE and now more recently AEW. And it's like, if you're not into that, there really isn't anything else. Again, I'm talking at like a very mainstream on TV type level.
Similar to maybe what the function of the radio was like decades ago, where like if you wanted to listen to music, you had to turn on the radio and you had to be subjected to perhaps bands that you had no interest in.
Sure. And there could be value in like shitting on whatever is on the hit parade at that time. Also, and you alluded to this very early in the episode, Wai, talking about Ultimate Warrior at SummerSlam 92. And this idea that it can always change, and that also the crowd very much can dictate creative change or directions in the storytelling and the characters and whatnot. I think that's also one of the reasons why we stick around, especially, I mean, look, for you, Wai, you engage from the art criticism perspective. You also have built a project and then a business out of this. So that keeps you in it. But for most of us who are just fans, there's always the potential that next Monday, everything can get better. Mm-hmm. And that's always been interesting to me. It's like every Monday, they have the potential to just clean slate it. And everything that wasn't working, like it's new again. And sometimes we've experienced that, like hard pivots. We just did. Mm-hmm. And there's this sense, people may compare it to like an abused relationship type thing. But like people sometimes hang around because, well, it could get better.
And it often does, and that's part of the, I think, variety show aspect of what professional wrestling is. For every Max Dupree out there is an LA Knight. There's a Sami Zayn storyline that would have been taking place concurrently that showcases the heights of this thing that we all love so much. So we kind of sit through the bad in order to even occasionally experience the good.
Yeah. And I argue when it's great, like when wrestling really hits and clicks. And this is a lot of what I try to do at Ring of Honor, especially when I'm trying to market pro wrestling to, quote, non-wrestling fans. Like I really try my best to express that when done well, I feel with full conviction, one of the most beautiful, effective art forms known to humankind. Like when it clicks, and it's such an engaging art form. It's not just the relationship between the crowd, but again, it's live. It's Shakespeare in the round, high production level. Like when there can be depth and storytelling and highs and lows and payoffs and drama, like it sometimes can be very rare for all these things to come together. And of course, this is subjective. For what works for some people, like certainly won't work for others. But there's people I know in my life that when they first were introduced to wrestling, they treat it like it's the circus, it's a joke. And I've then witnessed years later, like them. I was at NXT, the first Brooklyn, Sasha and Bailey. Like people were crying. I became emotional. Like it was, that show in particular was this culmination, not only of like that storyline and the Bailey character, but of NXT. That was like the first peak of it. Like we sold out an NBA arena as the minor league thing. And like the excitement, it was just palpable. You could feel the talent, felt it too, and we're on fire. And it was also from the crowd perspective, like a rejection of main roster. And like, it was just I wish I could find more things in life that could make me feel like that.
Yeah. And you kind of, sparked a question I kind of want to throw out to you, Neal, as well as the entire audience that might be listening to this right now. If you're a patron, you can find a link to call in. I'm actually just kind of going to throw it out here into the chat room as well. If you guys want to call in and maybe get your thoughts. And specifically, I kind of want to ask the question, when was a time that something involving professional wrestling drove you to tears? With respect to Dave Wills, of course, the the
Legend.
spokesperson for the emotion of pro wrestling. And I think history, for people who don't know, Dave Wills is the it's still real to me, damn it, guy. For me at least, I feel like history has kind of like reframed this moment as like not one to really, I mean, laugh at. Like he's all of us. Like
the emotion, if I can, Wai.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure I've shared this before on this show. So one of my big ideas at Ring of Honor was the campaign Honor is Real. Because for most people, when you mention wrestling, the thing you get in response is, oh yeah, like that stuff's fake, right? And my response from the perspective of the brand Ring of Honor Wrestling is no shit, but honor is real. And what does honor represent? So when I'm watching this Bailey Sasha feud storyline culminate with like the quote good guy overcoming evil and making her dreams come true within the context of this NXT brand peaking and this like meta context of, what I explained before of like, these are the underdogs, kind of their crowning achievement. And it's their real life human beings, these pro wrestlers realizing their dreams as well, not just the characters they're playing. Like that shit's real. Mm-hmm. That's as real can get, which is why it could move someone like me to tears. So when the "it's still real to me" line was said, like I'm assuming that's what he was talking about.
So I believe he was actually talking about like the passings of several wrestlers. Here. Okay. I wish I actually had the clip with me, but anyway, it was like on the surface it appears to everybody, I don't know, like especially on a mainstream level, that it's a guy who really believes that this shit is real and he's crying about it, but he's crying about like the real people that do this fictitious art, and those are the moments where I'm certainly more driven to, I don't know, a level of emotion, because like wrestling happens on several levels. It's on the level that you're watching superficially of what's on screen, but like behind the scenes and sort of like the mentality of the performer is also a level that I think a lot of us certainly watch with. And for me, a very vivid memory of like when I was driven to tears watching pro wrestling was not the Hell in a Cell between Mick Foley and The Undertaker, but a highlight recap of the Hell in a Cell between Mick Foley and The Undertaker that they aired on an episode of Sunday Night Heat, where they had, highlights from the actual event, but also clips of Foley talking about hell, what was going through his head. And it was like one of my first experiences even watching the match, because I never watched it live. But I saw the first dive where he kind of fell off the top of the cage, and then in an interview spliced in between these highlights, he talks about how it was too early in the match and he felt like he didn't give the audience enough. So he decided to get off the stretcher so that he can go back up there and be thrown off again. And that's like a level of, I think, dedication to your art and also responsibility you feel for entertaining an audience that I was just, it made me emotional to just even hear somebody be that dedicated to entertaining somebody else. What about you, Neil? Have you had any moments that in pro wrestling that might have driven you to tears?
Many, yeah. And I'm not a big crier. I mean, there's the obvious ones when a wrestler that's very popular and beloved passes, Jay Briscoe recently, of course, and Bray Wyatt, and those 10 belt salutes, and you can see it's like you said, it's when it traverses into the reality sphere. Those other locker room members standing there on the stage, many of them in tears, remembering their fallen comrade, that's deeply affecting. Other moments that aren't, of course, quite so serious, but still serious enough for fans. Danielson's speech when he retired, I thought really got me. The "I am grateful" speech he gave when none of us thought he was, that was, we all thought that was the end of his career. In ring, I wouldn't so much be brought to tears as just sort of, I know that it's transporting me, it's taking me on the story, because I feel like I'm just so drawn in that I can't even be distracted. And one of my go-to matches to sort of ask a new or prospective fan to have a look at is the TakeOver Dallas match between Sami Zayn, who I've been a fan of since he was Generico. I always loved him in Steen, you know, and I would get the PWG stuff that involved them. And I loved it when they came into NXT, because this was two of my favorites, getting into the big leagues, the big system, and who knew what would happen after that. But the black and gold NXT period, and it looked like Sami was coming to the end. And that match with Nakamura at TakeOver Dallas, I think, is one of the ones I would always, it's just, it holds up for me. It's not the best wrestling match ever. I don't think it's one of Meltzer's, you know, it's probably a 5 for Meltzer. I don't know. I've never checked. I don't care. It doesn't matter it matters to me. That was just an incredible match. And I think that what Sami put into it, because this was supposed to be kind of his last, it was framed as kind of his last big chance to really break out as from being the underdog, and he still loses, you know. I just thought the storytelling was amazing.
Let's open it up here to the post wrestling community that might be watching us live here. And I want to start off with a call from the recent guest on Postmarks, somebody who had a chance to maybe speak at length about this topic. So I encourage everybody to go and check that out. Robert Pearson joins us. Hey, Robert, how you doing?
Hey, guys, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
A bona fide celebrity on the wellness policy.
Roberts Pearson himself.
Oh, I don't know about that. Definitely more on the Roberts side than the celebrity side, but I appreciate it nevertheless. And you know, I was thinking about a couple moments that made me cry, but while, you know, we're all sort of pouring our heart out here, I feel like I should mention just being a fan of wrestling, and especially in the last few years, the thing that's sort of most emotionally and most consistently connected with me, and you guys have spoke a little bit about it already, but it really is the sense of community, and specifically within the post community. You know, Wai, I was actually, I don't know why I didn't do it, but I was going to text you and John yesterday and thank you guys, because you know, there's probably been at least half a dozen people since the Postmarks episode has debuted who have reached out and texted me, and it's been really nice. You know, I've not really experienced anything like that before, and even this year I've been going through some difficulties, and all three of you guys I've spent time on the phone with, and again, obviously you're all in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, but to be able to connect with people and make those friendships, it's so valuable. So not only pro wrestling, but again, you know, the post machine, as it were, it really is such a valuable thing, and something that I hold really near and dear to my heart. So I just want to say that right off the top.
You know, honestly, Robert, the credit is all due to Bruce Lord and David Myers for coming up with the concept of Postmarks, which, for people who aren't aware, is the show that they do once a month, interviewing members of the post wrestling community. And it's, for me, one of my favorite shows to just get to know everybody that's listening to these. And I think everybody has a very interesting story to be able to tell, with their own sort of attachment to pro wrestling, and maybe sort of like self-gratifyingly their own attachment to post wrestling. That I love. Those are probably my favorite sections that, you know, to listen to. But you can find that right now on the website or in the Post Wrestling Cafe feed. Those are all free episodes. But what else did you have to say about the topic, Robert?
Well, I mean, I definitely, Neil, you kind of touched on it. I think the first time I ever cried watching a show was the Eddie Guerrero tribute show. You know, this was still a time where I really wanted to be a pro wrestler and was working in WA, Florida, shows as a ring crew only as a teenager. And Eddie was one of the guys where I remember practicing his moves and really connected with him. So when he passed away out of nowhere, I mean, it was like a punch to the gut. You know, it just came out of nowhere. And that was a long 2 hours filled with a lot of tears, you know, watching that. But to add on what you guys have talked about, I think that a lot of discussion is had about what makes a good promo, and firing up a crowd, getting people excited to buy something, a pay-per-view, making people laugh. These are all things I think our favorite wrestlers can do, but it's a much shorter list of wrestlers who can make you cry. And I will say two guys that stand out in a contemporary setting who have definitely got me choked up and brought tears to my eyes would be Eddie Kingston and Cody Rhodes. I can't tell you off the top of my head which Cody Rhodes promo or even which Eddie Kingston promo it would be, but their ability to be passionate, have ebbs and flows, and kind of, cut in and out of something and make a point and hit it and let the crowd react. I mean, maybe two of the best ever, but certainly two of the best right now that can bring some tears to someone's eyes.
Robert, can I interrupt you really quickly? It's just a very, very short story, and it's about Eddie. There was a digital exclusive after he won the Continental Classic, and it wasn't shown on AEW television. And I welled up because this guy is just such a sweetheart, and it means so much to him. And he was getting the digital exclusive guy whose name I forget. He's just an AEW staffer who follows them around, getting him into shot.
Giancarlo?
Giancarlo, yes, and that is the still from it. And he gets him into the shot. He says he doesn't care about the lighting. He wants to be real. And I remember welling up at that and thinking, here's a guy who just, to him, it is real, And that really connected with me because he's someone I really would love to know in real life, a bit like John and Wai were at one point.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to, because of Giancarlo, actually, meet Eddie in London after the big UK show. Ahmad and I got into the after party, and I think it was Giancarlo or Dom, who's sort of his partner / assistant on the production team, that introduced Eddie because they knew I was a big mark of his. And again, just couldn't have been a cooler guy, couldn't have been nicer. There was no ego. He and Will Hobbs might be the two friendliest wrestlers, which is a little funny when you think about their characters and kind of how they're portrayed. But yeah, just such a great guy. So hopefully you do get the chance to meet him someday, Neal, because he really is just fun. Like not just cordial, but actually like fun and laughs. And I think somehow they connected the dots that we're both Brooklyn guys, and so maybe he was a little nicer to me. But really great dude.
Awesome.
Relatable and somebody who has been very kind of open and honest, and it's sort of a part of his character, but his sort of self-confidence issues are something that he certainly wears on his sleeve, and you almost hesitate to call him a character, because I think like the best professional wrestlers, they're just kind of versions of themselves, maybe turned up to 11, right?
Which is one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to this genre of art. It's so unique when we compare it. I mean, to me, it is very similar to music, where there are some musicians that lean more into character or are, aspects of their personalities just turned up. But the musicians I'm into, like, I don't want to go to a show and you can tell that it's just a rote performance of these human beings going through the motion. You could play the same song 1,000 times, but be more present and emotive and, quote, real every single time you do it. I don't want to pick on anyone, but last night on Raw, the 6 women all had the opportunity in the Elimination Chamber to cut a, quote, promo. And some of them felt a bit more real than the others. Some of them felt like they were rehearsing their lines instead of me feeling more connected to the human being underneath the words. A Cody Rhodes or an Eddie Kingston, they're about as real as it gets for the expression of pro wrestling as an art form. And why are we drawn to this stuff? Because we feel something. We feel connected to other human beings expressing whatever they're expressing. Like, this is what it means to be human. Why are we drawn to art? Because we want to feel more alive, or we want to have our truths reflected through the various art forms. pro wrestling is just so interesting because yes, there is the layer of kayfabe or facade with gimmick, but these are also real human beings, and the most effective pro wrestlers, from my opinion, are able to blur the line to the point where yes, they are engaging and facilitating story. They are, quote, manipulating our emotions with the fiction, but it can feel real because there are elements that actually are real. What an interesting art form.
Well, and if I can add to that, Jordan, and then I'll jump so you guys can take some other thoughts and calls. But it just takes one detail. If you look at the spectrum of, let's say, an Eddie Kingston to a timeless Tony Storm, in terms of production value and everything, it only takes one Tony Storm promo where she looks in the camera and she alludes to something devastating that happened to her when she was young, and she coped with it by watching old movies. And then you realize that this whole character could potentially be a coping mechanism. It could be from her last title loss. And in an instant, a character that makes you laugh every week because she's so over the top or she's so silly, one little detail can just ground it and could potentially, again, bring you to tears or something. So I'm totally with you that it's easy to call it a variety show, but it is an emotional spectrum that a good episode of pro wrestling is. Much to your point, Jordan, like a good album. You can have a song that makes you want to get up and dance or go for a run. You can have a song that makes you cry. You can have a song that makes you think, and it's all contained within that, hour to 90 minutes of music that you're digesting. So, in any case, I certainly appreciate you three gentlemen and appreciate the post-wrestling community at large. And I'm glad I could jump on today and share that. And another selfish plug. If you haven't listened to Postmarks yet, give it a listen.
Thank you so much, Robert. Again, Postmarks, the latest edition right now, just kind of scroll through your Post Wrestling Cafe timeline. If you're not a member of the Post Wrestling Cafe, simply go to postwrestlingcafe.com and scroll down. It's one of the free shows that we have available on the network. A great episode from Robert, Bruce, and David. Let's go up next to Corey. Welcome, Corey, one of our favorite callers here on the Wellness Policy.
What up, Corey?
You are muted.
Thanks for having me, guys, and always a pleasure to talk with all of you. So I'm hearing all of this wonderful, passionate talk about professional wrestling. And the one thing that comes to mind between me and my relationship with professional wrestling is that even from when I first got into it, it has always been, for lack of a better term, the runner-up as far as like anything I'm interested in. It's always been my second choice or my settling for something else. When I got into professional wrestling, it was through the game WCW versus NWO Revenge for the Nintendo 64. And the only reason I even played that game was because I went to Blockbuster intending to rent the game Rampage World Tour, and it wasn't there. So I decided to play this game instead and got into professional wrestling through video games. Told my friends, hey, I rented this wrestling game. Come on over. They liked wrestling. They're the ones that got me into wrestling. And from there, I was into it. And then I turned 13. I discover music. I push wrestling to the side. And I don't get into wrestling again until I'm like out of college. I'm like 24 at this point. I get back into wrestling because some of my friends are into it. And I figure, well, I missed out on the golden age of prestige television. I missed out on Breaking Bad, Mad Men, Game of Thrones, all this stuff. So instead of watching all those things, I'll watch this instead. And so I love professional wrestling. I do. But I also find that, especially maybe now, recently, I always find that, I don't know, maybe there's other things I'd rather do in the moment. It's never a urgent priority for me as maybe it was when I'm more into it. That's not to say that it never evokes strong emotions in me. Like, hell, I proxied tickets from Japan to go to wrestling shows. Like, I'm in deep. Like the damage is done. I'm in it. I'm in it for the long haul. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that it's always happening. And so because it's always happening, I never feel like, strangely, that I'm never missing anything because I can always see something new or something. Like, it never seems urgent because when something's always happening, you can always experience it again.
It's not finite. It's not like a season of Breaking Bad or a movie that might release every 4 years. If you want to call yourself, I don't know, a Fast and Furious fan, all you have to invest is, maybe 2 hours every 2-3 years or so. If you want to call yourself a professional wrestling fan, you have to invest 5 hours, 10 hours a week, if you want to call yourself at least a current up-to-date pro wrestling fan.
But also to that point, pro wrestling has often, to me, felt like a warm blanket or a loyal dog, because no matter how difficult my life may be in any given moment, well, Monday night's coming again sometime soon. So there is this sense of consistency. And I understand why people running wrestling companies made it a priority, in part during the pandemic, to maintain that consistency. Now, obviously, they have like very large contracts, which like allow these companies to be viable from a financial perspective. But also there is this sense of normalcy, especially during that time of, okay, well, it's Monday night, Raw's on. Like, that's something that has been with us for a very long time. And so, yeah, I understand your point, Corey, where it's like, well, if you miss it, you're not really missing much. But also for some people who can really use it, it's always there.
Oh yeah, it's a very personal thing for me, just in the sense that just everyone's inundated with media, whether it's wrestling, TV, books, music. Like, there's only so much brain power that I, as one person, can allocate to on a day-to-day basis. When I'm done with work, I go and work out and I'm listening to music. And then once I'm done with that, like, what am I going to do? There are games I want to catch up on. There's a book I want to read. There's wrestling, and there's a lot of wrestling. There is, I mean, Wai, you were talking with John last night about this Michael Oku Will Ospreay match, and you said, well, we'll see if it's even in the top 5 a couple months from now of the year. That is an insane thing to think about, that the upper echelons of this is constantly in flux, and so you have to keep your tab on the vein of the internet in order to kind of stay up to date on this. It's perhaps I'm sort of speaking to the signs of burnout. But for me, wrestling has always boiled down to the live spectacle. That's where I think the true passion for me in professional wrestling is. I went to those early GCW shows back at Game Changer World in Howell, New Jersey. And for me, and I'm always relating everything to music because that's where a majority of my like life experience is in relation to just like everything I've done in my teenage years and 20s. But I mean, going to those GCW shows in Howell, New Jersey, and watching people just like slam light tubes on their head reminded me of all of the like scummy punk shows I used to go to in like warehouses with squatters in it, and people are jumping off like rafters and like getting illegal tattoos in the corner. Like, that's what it reminded me of. There was a palpable energy there. And, you're talking about a communal aspect to wrestling. And that is, for me, the like example of the energy that pro wrestling can generate. And speaking of Howell, New Jersey, and Game Changer Wrestling, you were talking about a match that brought me to tears. Well, this isn't tears of maybe like, like something that Bailey versus Sasha would generate, but I was watching the opening match of a GCW pay-per-view. It was Reed Bentley and John Wayne Murdoch, the Rejects, versus the legendary tag team of the Headhunters, Headhunter A and B. And I guess one of the Headhunters decided, and they're very large guys, like huge guys, and they're old also. And one of their finishers is a moonsault. And one of the headhunters decides he's going to get up to the top rope to do said moonsault. And he's holding on to a pole that's attached to the turnbuckle. The pole bends at like a 90-degree angle, and he just tumbles backwards. And then John Wayne Murdoch quickly rolls him up for the pin. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was the hardest I ever. There it is. There's the exact match. And I had never laughed harder. I got it on film. My friends and I watched this like 20-second clip all the time. I was crying. I was like keeled on the floor, like just curled up in a ball, like laughing in tears. And I had never felt that way before watching wrestling in my entire life. It was just, it was pure joy. And the fact that I can even talk about this and still like crack a big smile on my face, just like, it shows that like, this stuff can have like a positive impact on yourself.
Thank you so much for sharing, Corey.
Yeah.
Appreciate the call as always.
Of course. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you, Corey. Hey, let's go up next to an infrequent caller here we usually have on the Wellness Policy, and that is Maddie B. Maddie B, are you there?
Oh, shit.
How are you?
There he is.
Hello. Wai, Neal, Jordan. Nice to see you guys.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see
What's
you,
up?
Maddie.
I thought, I'd end my long time of not calling. I thought I'd call in today because this is a pretty important topic, I think, at least for me, at least, and most people listening anyway. I love wrestling, like we all do. And probably, started when I was, maybe when I was probably 5 years old. My brother, who's 15 years older than me, is 13, is a huge fan. And he kind of got me going into it. I remember even my middle brother was a fan back in the day, but he's not anymore. But I remember we used to order pay-per-views at home, and Sunday nights I used to watch them. It was a school night, but my mom let me stay up and watch it. We just started recording the VCR, so we used to have probably like totes full of tapes, and it was the most incredible thing. And so I kind of grew up on that and watching all the pay-per-views. And then I remember when I started watching ECW, and it was like the coolest thing because like the hardcore wrestling, and then this and that. It was just like it was so cool. I would have been like probably 9 or 10 watching it, right? And it was like, oh my god, through tables, and it was the coolest thing ever. And I know we used to have those like little the wrestling buddies. So me and my oldest brother, we used to do kind of like a little almost like mini federation kind of thing. And we used to do like little matches, and he kind of let me do like wrestling moves on him and stuff like that and whatnot. We'd win a championship, then he beat me the following time, stuff like that. And we're just wrestling memories have been amazing. And still to this day, we're still massive fans. So that kind of helps us bring us close together, especially now that I'm in Halifax and he's back in Ontario. So we always text about Raw or Dynamite or pay-per-views like that, whatnot. So it kind of keeps us. It's pretty cool. And then even in the summer with the Money in the Bank in Toronto, I'll be heading there. And when Forbidden Door was there last summer, we did all the shows there and stuff like that, right? So it's memories I'll never forget, right? And sorry, go ahead, Wai.
Well, also for you, it's an attachment to a sibling that keeps coming back. Do you guys have any other sort of things that you bond over? Why choose professional wrestling?
Also sports too. We're both huge sports fans, like Raptors, NFL, Blue Jays baseball, and stuff like that, right? So we play fantasy sports too. So that's one of those things. So it's like we keeps us kind of it's just so those probably two things are the main things that we bond on. So no, if it's not wrestling, whatever, it's we don't talk about like the Raptors game or Super Bowl or this and that, right? So it's like those two things are kind of just like intertwined between us. So it's cool. It's just something we just if something's going on, not going too exciting in one thing, we talk about this, something like this, right? And then it kind of interludes into other stuff as well, right?
Interesting.
So I can remember the first pay-per-view I went to was the Hamilton show in '98, and that was I don't know, like too much memories on that because I would have been 10 years old. But I remember Ken Shamrock, The Rock, Mankind in a triple threat match it was so cool watching that, right? And that's probably one of my biggest memories for in my early days. And then it's like going to an event, just obviously watching of course they're watching it on going to an event actually is the spectacle of it is incredible. Like watching the Osprey Omega match last just like being there. And obviously watching TV when I came home and over that, but just like being there and seeing just the audience and just the atmosphere, it was and it was just unbelievable. And also obviously that weekend I met you, I met Neil and a lot of people, and it's almost kind of like a full circle moment, right? Because you talk to me online, and you interact, we watch, you and John doing the all your reviews, whatnot, and just talking with Neil and stuff like that, and just and actually like going in. Obviously, I FaceTime with you, Jordan. I remember John Cena got me on this, so it was a quick little visit, but it was nice to see you as well there. But it makes because like. Oh, it was just so cool. You think, okay, maybe you'll read them one day, but you just never know. But then actually like doing it and just because really, throughout the pandemic, that's where I really kind of like, I wasn't following you guys for a while, but the pandemic really kind of brought me into, listening like a lot. Right. And just so, I want to thank you guys for, because, it's always hard enough for a lot of us. Right. So just, to be entwined in the community and, like just obviously watching wrestling and this that, but like more the community aspect of it was absolutely huge for me. So just you can't like like it's just one of those things that you almost can't put into words. It's something, right?
Yeah, there's a real power to that, Matty, because you're on. We met at Forbidden Pour and Door/Pour Door.
Yeah.
Bang each other, Death Riders or whatever Davey has
come up with. I remember I came home and I was, and I don't drink that too often, but that Monday morning I was
yeah. And Robert was on earlier, and I was basically stood beside Robert watching the show. So that just speaks to the power of the community. 3 people from 3 different nations,
Yeah,
and
it's you don't think about it too often, but then when you actually like. Just it's wild how just connected you guys can get, right? And part where the emotions. I know like probably the Brody Lee tribute at Dynamite was probably the one that really got me. Mm-hmm. And it just because I remember I went to an A1 event in Hamilton, one that Ethan Page runs, and a buddy of mine was wrestling on it, and Brody Lee was on that show, and so kind of knowing him from there, and then. Can watch him kind of succeed from there into WWE, and then and then he finally got his his big moment in AEW, and then all taken away, and it was like just the emotion that night, and even like I know the BT episode, I think the one after the Dynamite, I remember you talking about Eddie Kingston, he did like a little they showed a backstage thing. I'm talking to probably maybe there was like 10-15 wrestlers in there, and the speech that he said was just. It was absolutely incredible because the emotion he elicits, and obviously from his promos, but this one he was like, he always does real, but this was just like, I don't know, it was absolutely incredible. And even like with Moxley, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, thanks, Wai. That was just like I don't know, it was even watching, even looking at it now, and kind of get emotional about it, right? And even like with Moxley, he did the first kind of speech on that show, and with him, like promo wise, just like and he always from the heart running, but this was just he just felt he felt something there, right? And even that with like obviously shout out Dickie, Brandon, and Martin Bushby for he was on How It Flies. Just from listening to that, it just his promo work is absolutely unbelievable. So every time he talks, there's you feel something from it, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Maddie. I think probably maybe one of the bigger moments of communal grieving that we've all had was the Brody Lee tribute show, and I mean I'm old enough to remember like the other tribute shows that we all had, and that's something wrestling is unfortunately sort of a genre that is filled with a lot of tragedy. And part of, I think, experiencing it is to grieve through it. But we at least have sort of these outlets now where we can kind of all do it together and maybe find some sort of comfort, just kind of with each other. So thank you very much, Maddie, for sharing.
No problem. I appreciate it, and this will be more. I'll do this more often now. So we kind of went, but now I'm kind of back into it, and and obviously, guys, I thank you guys I appreciate for everything, because I'm not most like it's been nervous going on there, and I've gotten better, obviously. But no, I talking to you guys makes it a lot easier. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Good job, Maddie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Maddie. Let's go up next to Hansi. Welcome back to the show, Hansi.
Oh shit! Look at him. That is wonderful, Hansi.
Mean Gene's ghost staying behind me, man. You guys touched when it comes aside from all the deaths in wrestling that made me cry, whatever, like Owen Hart, Eddie Guerrero, like those are obvious ones that made me cry. As far as storylines go, that have like, especially when I knew it was like, because at an early age, my parents told me that it wasn't real because I was having nightmares of like Andre the Giant and Sika like breaking into my house. You know what I mean? Because like if my logic was like if like if the good guys couldn't stop Andre the Giant from choking Hulk Hogan out, what they call like how they're gonna like stop him like from breaking into my house, whatever, and all that. My parents, no, they're all friends. They're all friends. So then it actually changed my perception a little bit, because I just always thought that these guys were like, okay, it's cool, but the clock just get a little bit invested. And then when I found out that like a lot of these guys behind the scenes like have egos over who can lose, I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know about that. But as far as like storylines, I feel like Owen Hart tricking his mom to throw in the towel, that one really made me cry the most a little bit. And the thing is, that pay-per-view was on a Wednesday, on a Wednesday, because it was Thanksgiving Eve. So for the Americans, so I had to go to school the next day, and I'm like sitting there all depressed because Bret Hart lost his title, and it was because of Owen Hart. I think when Bret Hart was reuniting with the Hart Foundation in '97. That speech he gave about Owen and how like the WWE tore their family apart and all that, like that promo was really, really good. I did cry when Earthquake sent Hulk Hogan out at the hospital for a bit, and then more recently, which is, I guess, because I deal with my own mental health and my own trauma, and like like the whole like abusive relationship type of deal with like institutions and all that with like the Stern Show. I found that the Sami Zayn storyline with Roman Reigns, that one actually made me cry a lot too. When Sami, what they call, finally hit Roman, like, you know what I mean? Like, it was really, really emotional. But yeah, those are some of the notable ones that have made me cry, at least. You know what I mean? I never like admitting that, because I don't know. I don't like admitting. For so long I've tried to like hide crying from like art. You know what I mean? Like whether it's like Sopranos or something like that. You know what I mean?
I'm with you there with the Sami Zayn storyline. That immediately came to mind, maybe as a moment that made me really emotional, strictly based off of the fiction of the intended moment, rather than anything sort of like beyond it. And that, I think, is purely down to the incredible storytelling they did to build up to that moment, and the incredible execution and level of acting that you got from predominantly Sami Zayn, but also from here, Paul Heyman, Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, all men that were involved in this scene that I thought was really pro wrestling at some of its best storytelling, at least, outside of the sort of bell-to-bell aspect of it.
And that's one of the things. I know people some people, like some of the other fandom that just wants like kind of like just Attitude Era level storylines and like that kind of. And I like the environment, but like some of the most emotional stuff, like you can have like some of these real like dude, like the entire Bret Hart '97 storyline. That right there was like complete, like to me, it was complete art. Like the fact that like the thing is, like I personally didn't turn on Bret Hart, even though I know he was getting annoying and obnoxious about complaining about the cheating and all that. But I was like, dude, he's being wronged. He's not in the, you know what I mean? So that whole '97, like the America versus Canada stuff, that was some of Bret Hart's best work that I've ever seen him do. And you know what I mean? Like, I remember getting so invested into that, like especially the Calgary Stampede match that they had, whatever, where like it just emotions. That was probably some of the best stuff that WWE was doing, even before the Attitude Era kicked off, basically. Other things that I'll mention about how my first memory, like it was always on television from what I can remember, but my first real memory of a wrestling angle, and this is why I probably hold Bret Hart people that were part of that segment in high regard. It was when Macho Man was getting beat up by Honky Tonk Man in the Hart Foundation, and Elizabeth goes to get Hulk Hogan, and just everyone that was a part of that segment. It was just a magical moment, and I remember just that being the first thing that I actually remember from wrestling, whatever. And it was a part of my life, and it was hard in in the early 90s and then junior high because it wasn't popular. If you talked about it, like the only time that you talked about wrestling in junior high with where I went was when something really, really cool happened. Like, oh look, Diesel gave Undertaker the middle finger, or Ahmed Johnson did something cool, whatever. Like those are the only time. And then luckily Attitude Era kicked off when I was right when I was getting into high school. And so like it wasn't like it wasn't super embraced by everyone in over there, but like it was still more popular. You're allowed to talk about it. Like you wouldn't get made fun of for wearing a Stone Cold shirt or an NWO shirt, whatever. You know what I mean? And my friend wanted to start a backyard league, and I reluctantly went ahead, even though we didn't know what we were doing, whatever, and all that. But like it was just still like just having fun doing that kind of stuff, and me being the booker, and I understood for the first time being a booker, like or trying to write a backyard line where I'm injecting myself into the storylines of being a champion, even though like this guy that can beat my ass. I thought it was funny, and then that's why I didn't want to do it. But there was a time when my other friends were really worried because me and my friend, even though there was no cameras, all we would do everywhere we went, like whether it was in school, in like the auto shop, we would do hardcore wrestling all the time. And like, we would practice back body dropping each other on this one car that was always there for some reason, right?
God,
Jesus.
Dude, it's nuts. It's nuts. But the other thing is, but I guess post wrestling community tied to the live audio wrestling. That was also part of my early, because I was one of the early guys on the internet of 95, and I remember my friend, my family friend, telling me what the internet's going to be able to do in the future. He's like, you're going to be able to watch movies, television, all that. And I thought it was going to happen right there in 95. I'm like, so I can watch In Your House, British Bulldog versus Bret Hart? He's like, I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. But he's like, no, you can't do that right now, whatever. But I used to like try to download, like, I don't know if you guys ever had this with dial-up. I don't know if you guys just went on when the internet had cable. But when I had dial-up in the beginning, but we only had 2 hours of internet, and it would be free after midnight. So with the so for some reason, like when my dad got that deal, and I wasted like an hour and a half trying to download Cactus Jack's theme song basically. So I don't know why out of all the theme songs I did, whatever, right? I was never subscribed to newsletters, but I would go on free websites where they would also have weird rumors, and I would print them out, and I would be dealing them out like it was crack to my friends in junior high. I actually started writing for like a very popular free site, and I wouldn't know anything, so I would just make up. Like I go through my connections. I heard that Puff Daddy is gonna be at WrestleMania 14 because they named the pay-per-view No Way Out. And then one of my friends who read that emailed me, goes, "You don't have any fucking connection with Puff Daddy." I'm like, yo, dude, don't ruin my gimmick. But the thing is, there was this guy, I guess because everyone in that community started hating me eventually, right? They started making rumors about me, and they're going, this Imran guy, I call myself Slimran, whatever, because my name was Imran, right? But I just call myself Slimran for the man they call Slim, whatever. But they started posting stuff about me, and they go, I finally found the identity of this dastardly Slimran. And it's a picture of Adolf Hitler. I'm like, dude, I go, this cannot be that serious where you're comparing me to Adolf fucking Hitler, whatever. You know what I mean? But that's when I started kind of getting away from the internet for a bit until it became popular in like the mid 2000s and all that kind of stuff, and then also kind of connecting with you guys and other people, like Busted Open and all that, even though that didn't end up well, whatever. But I thought personally, I wanted to be in the wrestling world, and I guess because of like all the stuff that you're hearing now, I always had that kind of shit in my head that like, can I be in a mafia institution that might do horrible things? Can I overlook it? And I'd always go back and forth, whatever. But I always thought that me being on the Howard Stern show, I would be able to, because you're talking about WWE, Howard Stern's show is the WWE of radio. It's like very similar, like wacky characters, over the top storylines, and all that kind of stuff, right? So I always thought that I could kind of transition with that, but I just never. I guess like I just kind of dropped the ball in 2011, 2012 when like I was supposed to be, in wrestling terms, pushed to the moon, I guess, but I kind of had cold feet, and now so that's why I kind of relate to some of these these promos from wrestlers talking about mental health, like Eddie Kingston, because it's so fucking real to me, you know what I mean? Because I can relate to what I've been through and what like other people go through. That's why I have really compassion for cogs in the machine, because I feel like you could get mad at the cogs, but like it's like the institutions that produce that kind of behavior, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing, Hansi.
Yeah, no problem, man. Sorry for talking you guys' ear off, man. I always love it calling in, especially with this topic, man. I thought you guys would love these stories, whatever. But take it easy, guys.
Don't be sorry. The passion comes through. So thank you very much, Hansi. Let's go up next to New Jersey. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
No.
What's going on, man? I feel so bad because like I people's passion for pro wrestling during these calls is just like, it's not me. I care more about the community than the shows itself. Like hanging out with Neil and Robert at that show was like, that was life altering. It was like one of the funnest vibes I've ever been a part of. Like me hanging out with Braden and Davey and Sino and Fire Frank and Way and John and having lunch with Way, and we're just looking at each other for like 10 minutes and not saying a word, but we're just vibing and we're enjoying the moments, you know what I mean? Because these moments are fleeting and you never know when they're going to happen again, you know what I'm saying? Like dapping up Way without waiting in line for the Forbidden Pour, that was incredible. It was like a vibe you wouldn't be able to feel, like you know what I'm saying? Like,
and dapping out the president of New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Oh man, if we only knew like that moment changed course of history. You know, 2 bad nights at in Toronto altered his future, becoming the head of a powerful organization in Japan. Incredible, that moment. It's touching. I almost cried with that, but the moment you got, you know, the moments like that you cry about, right? But you know, I was emotional, but the moment that made me cry was when New Jack wanted to stop me out of 97.
I'm actually very curious about you, Brandon, because like we know you, and typically you do not call us to talk about pro wrestling. I don't even know if you watch the shows half the time. So it's the community, as you're saying, that kind of keeps you attached. But like, how did you even get into wrestling in the first place?
I mean, they used to show like WCW around here. It was like during the weekends and stuff like that on our UHF channel and stuff like that. So you would watch like WCW Saturday night and stuff like that. Like, you know, you would get the highlights of the Halloween Phantom being unveiled as Rick Rude, which was one of my moments. Like Rick Rude is like one of my favorite heels of all time. Like he was such a badass. Like, I mean, you hear the stories later on why he didn't get a push, because he hurt Hogan that one time back in the day. But he was like he was like one of my favorite. Like him and Brian Pillman, like old school Brian Pillman was like I legitimately cried when he passed away. Like that was like one of my moments. Like in all seriousness, when he died. Like.
And to this moment, like, are you actively engaging in the current product? How much are you watching, and what kind of keeps you attached to wrestling outside of the community?
My guilty pleasure. Yeah, I mean, I watch. You know, I take notes and stuff like that. But I mean, my guilty
take
pleasure.
Notes for what?
you gotta get these jokes off, right?
Material
for your calls. Got it. Okay.
But I mean, my guilty pleasure is Rampage.
Really? What's that?
Just like the stuff that happens on the show, like, you know, it's
Like what?
like programs like Angelo, was it Angelo Parker and his romance with Ruby
Ruby.
Soho? Yeah, I mean it's a good timeless moment in pro wrestling, like or Sammy Guevara jumping on the ladder, like 50 feet ladder, and doing a moonsault on Jeff Hardy.
Brandon, I like Rampage 2. It kind of feels like a Shotgun Saturday Night
yeah
type vibe, because it's in the shadows. There's this sense that it maybe doesn't really matter, but because of that, there may be more of a sense of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, they could do whatever they want on there. Like, and I mean, the viewership is not, up, but I mean, I dig it. It's cool. It's all right with me. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, Les Jericho Appreciation Society and Jericho on the show would do wonders, and it's slowly happening. I guess Jericho's on break right now, so all praise be to the Lord and Savior for for that. But the thing about pro wrestling is the community, like I said earlier. Dickie and doing a podcast with Martin Bushby, like he DM'd me out of nowhere asking if he wanted to do that, and I jumped on a whim, and now we're what are we on, 6 episodes now coming up?
Brandon, is the majority of your wrestling community like us kind of people online, or do you have people in New Jersey that you connect with over wrestling?
Probably my brother. That's it. Like the people that I talk to that like pro wrestling, like one of my coworkers, and one of my friends that knows Surfer Ray Odyssey, indie legend. But that's it. Like the people I knew who grew up watching wrestling, either stopped watching or dead or in jail right now. So that's the gist of it. And this community, yeah, pretty much. Like we talk wrestling, but I rarely talk wrestling on that community too. I'll talk about MMA or stuff that happens in life, or with Neil talking about amateur wrestling sometimes.
Or Ray Odyssey.
Or Ray Odyssey, get get those takes off as well. But yeah, that's to answer your question. That is the gist of it.
Or your what would you do scenarios.
Absolutely, man.
Legendary.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Or being a lead crusader for Chris Leone's ailments.
Brandon, for as well as I know Neil, I've never met Neil in person.
Oh, you're in for a good time, man.
And at some point over WrestleMania weekend, we will be seeing at least some live wrestling together. So you are someone who has sat through an entire wrestling event with Neil. Do you have any, I guess, either tips or just like anything I should be aware of in advance?
Just be yourself, man. Just show him the slums of Baltimore, man. Like we're Chocolate City. Take him there. Show him what real grit and fear is all about over there. You know what I mean? No, but Neil's fun, man. He'll entertain you. He'll regale you with life living on the Emerald Isle. Look at that. Look at that vibe, man. We're just it's like we're at a sporting event. Was that there to see a Punk match? But no, I mean Neil's awesome, man. He's one of the special ones in this community. Like you can talk about anything with him, and he's always like he'll hit you back up. Like, so he's the best.
And just on that note, several people at this point have asked us about whether or not we're doing any sort of live event while in Philadelphia. We're not planning on doing any sort of like formal like ticketing type of live podcast or anything, but we are planning on doing some sort of informal meetup, most likely on the Sunday afternoon before WrestleMania Night 2. So there's not as much wrestling going on during that time.
Let's all meet at a Wawa.
You know what? You are the expert of that particular area, so we might be relying on you.
There's too many Wawas, dude. There's like a Wawa in every block. They got them in Maryland now. It's disgusting, dude.
They do?
Yeah, they do.
Well, we will let everybody know. Could be a Wawa, could be whatever. But thank you, Brandon. You are always, whether or not you are talking about professional wrestling, you're one of the most fascinating voices.
You're a sweetheart. Incredible outfit you're wearing today also. I missed the Gracie hoodie, though. Wow. You retired that, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I feel like I've gotten my mileage out of that one. Thank you, Brandon, for paying attention.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you later.
See you, Brandon.
We are approaching 2 hours here, so we might have to actually wrap up here. But before that, I did want to maybe get into a bit of a topic that I think you hinted at earlier in the conversation, Neil, and that's maybe our current relationship to professional wrestling, especially in light of stories and sort of darkness that maybe would color everything that we watch and how it might have affected us in recent times. Would you care to start maybe sharing any sort of thoughts you have on that particular aspect of your fandom?
It can be difficult. There's no two ways about it, trying to reconcile these incredibly awful allegations, and in some cases, historically, proven crimes, with your love of the art form. And it's just, I don't know, it's how you relate to it as you get older. When you're a kid, like you said, it's almost like a cartoon brought to life. You've got no prospect at that point even of knowing that Vince McMahon is the owner of the company. He's just, a guy with a microphone at that point. It is difficult. I find that some comfort in the sense that I hope the individuals who are responsible for this and for fostering a culture in which these terrible things happen may be brought to justice in some way or another, or at the minimum ejected from the business, because fans are very aware these days of all of this in the way that they weren't, pre-internet and all of these things being the Janelle Grant lawsuit being able to be read by anybody at the click of a button on the internet. So I cope with it, I guess, by divorcing my love of the art form and admiration for the performers from the wrongdoing of individuals, which I hope is prosecuted to the full extent of the law, whether it's civil or criminal. And wrestling, we are right not to ignore it. It's you see complaints on occasion in the comments, why are you still talking about this? It's because it's extremely important. We want to clean up this form of entertainment that we love. But it's not unique to wrestling either. We know that there's historically, the sort of roadie culture in music and things like that. But it's, I imagine, particularly bad when you're thinking back only to 2022, when some of these worst allegations imaginable have taken place. So yes, I think as true fans, we want it cleaned up because it's a tremendous, wonderful, as we've been talking about, art form and form of entertainment, and something that can make us laugh, make us cry, all of those things. So that's why we should care about the dark side of it too, and getting rid of that.
Certainly I speak from the perspective of somebody who is covering this at this point for a living, and therefore I don't really have a choice to maybe run away from it and escape it. But I think even if I did, I definitely wouldn't. Like you kind of maybe allude to, like, because we like this thing so much, we want it to be cleaned up. We want it to be, free of bullshit and free of terribleness attached to it. And if anything, that makes me want to run towards it a bit more, hopefully with, the sort of idea of shedding enough light on it that it would someday be at least, to a level of safety and sort of free of guilt, I suppose, to enjoy it. I also refuse to accept the idea that Vince McMahon represents professional wrestling, or even the WWE represents professional wrestling, because I think even when you're talking about an edition of Raw, a lot more goes into it than just the bad actors. Certainly, I think we have to keep in mind, especially for people at the top, the influence that they have and the benefit that they might have of our fandom. But I also don't think that that's the only thing that draws me to professional wrestling, nor gives me value from it. And again, it's all just with the hope of eventually cleaning it up. What about you, Jordan? Do you have any sort of feelings about this?
Of course. One of the things that has drawn us to wrestling is community, but what's a community? It's a group of people, and not everyone are good people, certainly all the time. Like, they're in relationships, people engaging with people, like, bad shit can happen. And I do feel like there's a sense of responsibility, at least for me personally, in if I'm seeing something that's not cool, then I could say something about it, at least not run from it. When I worked in wrestling, that always didn't play well to me politically, perhaps, and fine with that. I feel good sense of integrity in that. Actually, I think being part of post wrestling, there is a responsibility, and it always doesn't have to play out publicly. Like, it can be easy perhaps to tweet, or to just simply maybe share on a podcast, but like in private conversations too, in small ways of sharing ourselves, checking in with people. I also just want to publicly acknowledge just some of the really intelligent, cool women that are part of this community, like Karen Peterson and a Kate from Montreal and a Stephanie Chase. They are often put in like not enviable positions, or maybe they feel like they have to speak on behalf of women. That's not fair. It really isn't. And I really commend them for speaking with consistency, and some bravery to speak on behalf of women sometimes, even though that is not their job. And it's certainly not pleasant for them or anyone else to feel like they have to do that. And I think it's important to support people like that, but for also us to continue having these conversations. Again, one of the many reasons why I am drawn to you and John, because you guys have made it very clear that this current story, like you will continue to follow that beat, because what else is more important than it? I'd argue there's nothing more important than it. But to kind of go back to the original point I'm making, like, yes, what is this wrestling culture and fandom? Like, we're all just a group of people engaging together. And sometimes bad shit is going to happen. And then it takes the rest of us to call it out, to have the difficult conversations and experiences and be like, this is not acceptable. Let's do something different and hold those behaviors and those people accountable. It's just, how else do things get better in any community? Look, and this plays out whether, I'm sure, if you're into racing culture, if you're into black metal culture, if you're into ping pong culture, like, it's all just people, and bad shit happens, and it's through those communities that people can wrestle with these things that make us human. One of our chosen cultures is pro wrestling, and we have our own set of characters and people and not good shit that happens amongst us. And so this is a way for us to grapple with it in a more personal way, instead of feeling like it's beyond our control. Because to be honest, especially the wrestling world it's large, but it's very small. Like, once you're kind of in it, it's not hard to get to all the different characters within it. So it's like, I think a lot of us have more potential to change the culture than I think we realize. And that can be very empowering, certainly. In a very small way, part of my motivation with a show like this is to certainly not fix wrestling or fix anything in particular in wrestling, but to try to contribute something more positive to the culture of wrestling.
And we hope we've done that over these past 2 hours. Thank you to all of you guys who might have listened to the entire thing, or at least a portion of it. Jordan, what are we talking about next month?
Next month, we are inviting a dear friend of mine. His name is Nick Shiner, to join us on the Wellness Policy. We're going to talk about video games. Video games, like, I grew up with it. It's something that I don't really engage with in any serious way. But Nick is an interesting dude. He has spent his career in education, and he's very passionate about gaming. And he works for a company called Digital Promise, where their focus is the intersection of video gaming and education. And he travels, goes to conferences, speaks on panels, and he has a really interesting perspective and history in trying to not only advocate for the potential of video games, but really integrating gaming culture and gaming experiences in ways that maybe some of us don't always consider, and often for the contribution of education.
It's a topic that is around me all the time, and I know for the three of us, we might have all engaged with video games maybe at previous times in the past, but I don't think any of us are as actively engaged these days. So I'm hoping and for a lot of contribution from the post wrestling audience that I know might be a lot more attached to the gaming world than we are. So that is next month, March the 26th. At 12 p.m. Eastern time. We're bumping the time up just a little bit just to kind of suit our guest. So mark that in your calendars. We expect full attendance from all of you. Thank you very much for listening. Aram gets the last word. Aram, what is the last word?
Oh, hello, fellas.
Hello.
Hello, Aram. Where are you?
I'm outside of my house. I just came. Want to go in, but we got a new puppy, so I can't go in and speak at this hour.
Quickly, Aram, what do you have to say about this topic or anything?
Wrestling. I remember first time I cried is we were immigrants from Iraq, and like Saddam pushed us out of our country, and I didn't get there. And then I remember me watching WrestleMania 7 on VHS. And I saw Hulk Hogan beat up the Iraqi sympathizers. And I remember saying to my mom, "Oh, does this mean we can go back to our country?" And she looked at me and said, No, that's not how it works.
Oh,
yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, maybe she knew Hulk Hogan was the one who wanted to get rid of us in the future. Who knows?
Wow.
No. Wrestling, for me, wrestling is and I'll end it by this. It's an escape from reality. And I think it's for a lot of us.
Well said. Thank you so much, Aram. And thank you all of you for listening. Talk to you next month here